Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Stokastic NBA Strategy Show. As you guys come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Adam and I are about to be breaking down an 11-game NBA slate. Jordan is producing this morning. We're sponsored by Prize Picks. What's happening, Adam?
How's it going? Yeah, looking forward to a bigger slate tonight. Had fun with the 5-gamer last night. Had a good night, so hopefully carry it over.
Did you end up? I didn't look at the final standings last night. Did you have lineups that finished really highly?
I was in fifth. I stat corrected the seventh in the big DraftKings tournament. I had like 16% of my lineups come in the top 1%, so it was kind of frustrating not to do better. But also did well in small field stuff. Got like won some of the single entry three maxes. Got like third and eighth in the $200. Picked up 2 tickets to the 888 tonight on DraftKings. Picked up a ticket to the $2,500 NBA Millie Maker later, and to the 2,200 NFL Millie Maker on New Year's. So it was a pretty good night.
There we go. That qualifies as a good night. So I know for me now, kind of Josh-esque, I have not been staying up until the end of the game. So after I get all the injury news in from the final game, I go to sleep and I wake up in the morning and see how I did. So also, I don't know, like, because there's actually been times like for baseball, I've been following your lineups more closely than you've been following your lineups. And but for the last few slates, I've been going to bed, so I haven't even been staying awake for the end of the night to know how everybody else did. But good to see that you had a good night, and hopefully we could keep it going on to today. 11-game slate, injury news as per usual. But if you guys want access to all of the tools we have over at Stokast.com, and if you want them for free, if you've never signed up before, we have a 3-day free trial that you guys could take advantage of. And if you do sign up now, here's everything that's going to include. You're going to get the big Wednesday NBA slate, Thursday night football, Thursday NBA slate, and the big Friday NBA slate. So this is one of the times where it is good value, getting a good 3 days of trial in there covering basketball and football. Once again, 3 days for free if you never signed up. Got the link below. Click on that. Also, the link is in the YouTube chat. You can click on that to get access to our tools for free for 3 days. But let's start talking about this slate, Adam. And it begins with the Milwaukee Bucks against the Cleveland Cavaliers. And Chris Middleton has not been on the court all that often for the Bucks this year. Even in times when he's been on the court, he's been invisible. He's shit on a lot of fantasy lineups. For today, he is doubtful to play. Assuming he's not going to be out there, who's benefiting from the Bucks?
So it's kind of just status quo because he's been out for so much of the year. The pricing is sort of already there, but it should benefit Giannis and Drew to some extent. Not in the sense that they're like wildly underpriced here in a difficult matchup against Cleveland, but in the sense that they would look less appealing if Middleton were in. Giannis coming in at 12.4, Drew coming in at 8,400. They both look like pretty much correctly priced neutral plays in what should be a really good NBA game, and probably not the best DFS game between two teams with really good defenses. But they both look decent and slightly better than they otherwise would with Middleton out.
Yeah, two of the better defenses we have in the NBA, and also just constantly the Cleveland Cavaliers present a very difficult matchup because they have a really good defense and they play at a very slow pace. Right now, we've got Cleveland Cavaliers first overall in adjusted defensive efficiency, last in pace. So best defense, slowest pace. It does create hard matchups, and we've still got Giannis being fairly expensive, Drew Holiday also being expensive. From the time that we saw that there was Giannis out and Drew saw the increased usage. Is there anything else to talk about from Milwaukee?
Brooke Lopez is the only other piece that looks interesting to me, but with it being an 11-game slate, I doubt that he's going to really be that useful. I just think he's a little bit underpriced at 5,600, or at least like correctly priced. But yeah, nobody on this team pulling any ownership on DraftKings right now, and I really don't think that they should, outside of the occasional tournament lineup here and there.
Yeah, and like you said, these are two of the best defenses in the NBA. Cleveland Cavaliers first in adjusted defensive rating, and then the Milwaukee Bucks second. So we've got the two top defenses in the league, at least statistically, going today. And from the Cavs side of the game, it's a team that, occasionally I'll be getting to Garland, occasionally be getting to Mitchell. The front court guys, Mobley and Allen, I haven't played them a ton when they've both been active this year. So I think this is a game, like you said, great on paper in terms of a great real life NBA game. Hard to find a whole lot of fantasy value though. So is there anybody that that's really sticking out to you from the Cavs side of the game?
So I think that they have 5 guys that grade out as like neutral, as opposed to the 3 that Milwaukee has. Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Mobley, Jared Allen, and Kevin Love, coming off of a 24-minute game, all look to be priced like exactly where I think they should be, which means that they're reasonable contrarian options in tournaments, but also not guys that I plan on really building around at all. You should get 36 minutes or so from Mitchell and Garland. You should get 35 or 36 from Mobley and Allen. Love, did play 24 last game, like I said. I put him in for 20 here. It does work in terms of matchups because you're just going to have so many minutes where two of the three of Giannis, Lopez, and Bobby Portis are on the floor. And so the Cavs should easily be able to have Kevin Love out there for 20 minutes or so if they want to. Doesn't seem like he's limited by injury or anything like that. So at 3,800, there's certainly a ceiling there, but not like if you had Kevin Love in this spot on last night's slate, he'd probably be one of like the highest owned value plays. But on this slate, he's probably just going to kind of be another low owned contrarian piece just because it's 11 games and you're going to have stuff that looks a lot better.
There's been really weird results from Kevin Love lately, and I'm sure some of it's correlated to he had that thumb injury. They had said he was going to be out 2 to 3 weeks, then only missed 2 games. He came back. The minutes were a little bit lower, but it does seem like they're ramping up a little bit. He played 24 minutes last game, like you said. That was actually the most that he had played since November 18th against the Hornets. So maybe the minutes are coming back from Kevin Love. It would make him somebody who you could at least consider as a value option in large field tournaments. But 11 game slate, pretty good chance that there's going to be other better values that open up over the course of the day. Anything else we want to talk about from this game?
So just one other thing to note on Love. I do feel, I mean, confidence not the right word that he's going to play, 20 minutes or so. But I do sort of like the trend that you were getting. We had one game where he just like randomly didn't play a lot. But even though he hadn't been playing his normal 20 minutes since he came back from his most recent injury, you had seen the minutes like slowly increasing in each game. So that combined with the fact he played 24 last game and this matchup does make me feel like I can project him for 20 when, if it were a different matchup, maybe I'd go like 18.
All right, so let's move on to the Detroit Pistons against the Philadelphia 76ers. And from the Detroit side of the game, tough matchup for them as well against Philly. And from Detroit, we know Cade Cunningham's out. He has not played for a while, isn't going to be playing for the rest of the season. Jaden Ivey had arguably the best game of his young career last night. We know Bojan Bogdanovic has been really good lately, but it's an 11-game slate. There's a lot of value. The Pistons' rotation is a little bit hard to nail down. I don't really see anything that stands out in a major way here. How do you feel differently?
No, I think that there's a couple of appealing price tags, namely Jaden Ivey at 4,800 on DraftKings and Jalen Duren at 4,700. But the issue is just that this is an 11-game slate. Jaden Ivey was a really big part of my night last night. I had like 35%. It went great. But here going up against Philly, even though the price tag is a little bit cheaper, it's just going to be more difficult to get to him because the matchup's not as appealing. And more importantly, you just are going to have so many other plays to get to. So I think Ivy looks fine at that price. I think Duren looks fine at that price. He's been rebounding at a great rate. Should give you 28 minutes or so, but clearly plenty of foul risk in this matchup for Duren going up against Joel Embiid and the Sixers. So, you can't just assume he's always going to play 30, 31 minutes. You're going to have some games where he does lose minutes. And so, I've been going around 28 minutes on him. It makes him look decent, but it's never difficult to fill the center position. And I don't think he stands out as a great option. But I think both Ivy and Duren at least offer some value in tournaments. We know Bogdanovic has a high ceiling. I think it's going to be pretty difficult for me to get there, at least on DraftKings at 6,500. The only two pieces that I would anticipate getting to the way things look right now are Ivy and Duren.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And then one other thing I'm going to add about Duren as well is he's been a better points per minute fantasy producer as a starter than coming off the bench, which normally I would say shouldn't be the case. But this is also a really talented rookie, and it would also make sense that he just gets a little bit better as the year goes on. So some of the recent increase in production for Duren and the better increased points per minute production, I just kind of buy into it because this is a rookie who got a little bit of experience, struggled a little bit to start the year, and it just made improvements a couple of months into his NBA career. So hopefully sticks at center and the starting center, I should say, and that there's no need for the Marvin Bagley minutes and that the Pistons just kind of realize like, hey, we signed a really shitty contract a couple months ago. We shouldn't have done this. And they just stay committed to Duren over Bagley because I think there's considerably more upside there.
Yeah, and I'm with you on Duren as well. The big thing that's changed for him, and it does make me buy into it a little bit more too, his rebounding rate has just skyrocketed since he became a starter. It would be different if you were like, oh, hey, you're playing more minutes with Jaden Ivey and your usage rate is going up. I would be like, okay, this makes no sense. But the rebounding, that could just very easily be a very young, talented rebounder getting better at rebounding as he plays more. So I'm not, just going out and projecting him for 26% rebounding percentages like he's been putting up. But I think that if you balance it out between what he's done recently and what he's done overall this year, it's a pretty fair approach.
Yeah, pretty lopsided game on paper. Philadelphia 76ers favored by 11.5 points, one of the wider spreads of the night. So what do we do with some of the Pistons, with some of the Sixers high end guys against Pistons? Joel Embiid, James Harden. Harden's actually somebody I've been playing a fair amount of recently as a star with a lot of upside, but isn't quite priced the same way we've seen him in the past. So between Embiid and Harden, do you have a preference between the Sixers' two stars in tournaments?
Slight preference for Harden just because he's not a center. So that's going to make him a little bit easier to get to. Obviously, his actual cost is a little bit lower as well. So I prefer him. I like getting to either guy. There is obviously blowout risk here, but if this game blows out, it's very likely because Harden or Embiid have a big game. So I think they both look good. They're both getting very modest ownership with Harden coming in at 7%, Embiid at 6. But I happy to get to him. I think Harden's the one I'll get to first.
Yeah, it's the positionality for me. And then also, I've just been projecting him a little bit better than most other people. So just as a result, I end up with Harden a little bit more. The price point is appealing. The positionality is appealing. Point guard, shooting guard. So James Harden, definitely somebody who I'll probably end up being overweight to the field on. Our initial ownership projections, we have him at 7% on DraftKings at 10K with point guard and shooting guard eligibility. And then over on FanDuel, we've got Harden right now projected for 4% ownership and 10,200, numbers that are not going to be difficult for me to get overweight to the field on. Now, as for the other guys on the Sixers, are you looking at any of the role players? Tobias Harris has been shooting out of his mind lately. I think he's shooting like 60% from three this month. Harris or any of the other Sixers that are appealing to you?
So Harris and Melton are both pulling a little bit of ownership here, and I get it. I actually think that relative to salary, Embiid and Harden, even at their respective salaries, look better than Harris and Melton. But I could see just sort of falling on some Harris and Melton because it's kind of difficult sometimes to find, $6,600 Fords that make sense. So they're in a price range where I think is a last piece in that makes some sense. It is an appealing spot. You should get a lot of minutes from both guys. Not going to be thrilled with getting to them and doubt that I get to a lot of either one, but I think that they are at least reasonably priced.
Anything else you want to add from this game?
No.
All right, so let's move on. And by the way, if you guys haven't done yet, do us a favor by liking the video and subscribing to the YouTube channel. Now we've got the Toronto Raptors taking on the New York Knicks, and we've got Gary Trent listed as questionable for this game. And it's funny, Adam, because you and I were doing a show a couple of days ago, and we're trying to figure out why the hell did Gary Trent's minutes randomly go down to 25 minutes with no kind of news or anything like that. And then he's just randomly a late scratch the next game. So it seems like there was some sort of underlying injury that Trent had been dealing with. He has now missed 3 consecutive games. He's listed as questionable for tonight. OG Anunoby, on the other hand, unexpectedly came back. He was expected to be out for an extended period of time and then just appeared back in the Raptors lineup one day. But Gary Trent, questionable. How does his status impact the Raptors?
So I don't think it has too big of an impact because the guys that you're going to be comfortable getting to from the Raptors aren't really going to be impacted by Trent. It would knock Juancho Hernan-Gomez back to the bench, but he may go back to the bench anyway. They started Kem Birch in his place in the second half. I'm assuming that was matchup related with Embiid, and that if Trent is out, that you do get Hernan-Gomez back in the starting lineup here. But who knows? There's a lot of different ways that can go. But if Trent's back, I assume he will slide into that 5th spot in the starting lineup. Barnes, Van Vliet, Siakam, and Anunoby all look about the same with or without Trent. It also would lower the chances of you getting that big Chris Boucher game. We saw 30 and a half minutes total from Boucher last game, about 25 in regulation. He played the final 17 minutes of the game. That can still happen, but it's less likely to happen if Trent's back. Similarly, Malachi Flynn should lose his minutes if Trent is back. So the big impact is that it just takes away those sort of dart throw type value pieces that maybe you would gamble on otherwise.
Yeah, and then one thing that generally we do know for sure is that Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, these guys are playing massive, massive minutes for the Raptors. Something that basically never changes. Nick Nurse just plays these guys until they get hurt. Then they sit a couple games out. They come back and they go right back to playing all of the minutes in the world. Do you have a preferred spend up option of the guys Siakam, VanVleet, Anunoby, Barnes from Toronto?
I think it's Siakam just because he's been the best point per minute guy, and he, like you said, they all play huge minutes, but Siakam typically is going to play the most, or at least close to the most. Normally it's going to be between him and Van Vliet. So I think Siakam looks the best. I still don't know. Like, I wouldn't say he's a true priority. The guy's getting 1% ownership for a reason, but $10,400 likely to give you around 40 minutes if this game's competitive and well over a fantasy point per minute guy. So if he's not going to be popular, I do like getting to some Siakam in tournaments. Similarly, you should get a lot of minutes for Van Vliet. I would say he's the number two guy for me. It was good to see, like you said, OG Anunoby came back, immediately played 36 minutes. I expect him to play upper 30s here as well, but him and Scotty Barnes are both priced up enough where I'm not as interested in them as I am in Siakam and Van Vliet.
Barnes has also been a little bit disappointing this year. He was the rookie of the year. He looked terrific last year, and I was really expecting him to take a step forward this year. Not only is he not taking a step forward, but he's been a little bit worse. And then from a fantasy perspective as well, he's scoring about 32 and a half fantasy points in 34 minutes per game. But then also that's lagged over the last few weeks. So little bit of concern that Scotty Barnes maybe played over his head last year and isn't making the steps forward I thought that he was this year. And given his price point, other Raptors I prefer. I tend to agree with you. Pascal Siakam, the guy that I'd most want to get to. He's had the highest upside this year. And he's quietly probably one of the best stars in the NBA that people just don't talk about because he's doing everything for this team. Scoring, rebounds, assists, defensive stats. He's really been a fantasy monster.
Yeah, and it even like when you get him at these elevated price tags, like my first tendency still is to look and just be like, all right, I know Siakam's good, but I'm not paying 10-4 for him. And then I get projections done and I run my lineups and I'm just like, oh, I'm over the field on Siakam again. I feel like that like I agree that he's one of the best players that people don't talk about, and I think that kind of translates to fantasy as well.
Yeah, very few times has he been popular this year, unless there's a bunch of other guys out for Toronto. And I think he probably warrants just picking up more ownership than he has, just based on some of the upside we've seen from him. Now it's funny because on the other side with the Knicks, we've got a matchup between two coaches who historically like to run all of their starters into the ground. So primarily going to be starters versus starters in this game from the Raptor side. We know all the minutes that Nick Nurse plays his guys, but Tom Thibodeau is kind of the Nick Nurse before Nick Nurse. So guys like Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson, RJ Barrett have been playing really massive roles as of late. Quentin Grimes, he's been in the starting rotation and he's been playing bigger minutes. Anything that you really like getting to from the New York side of this game?
So they are on a back to back, but they didn't play huge minutes yesterday because they blew out Golden State. So that's good here. I like getting to Julius Randle for as long as Obi Toppin is out. He's 9,200 on DraftKings, so that price tag is coming up, but he's only pulling 5% ownership. And if this game is competitive, you're likely getting 37, 38 minutes from Randle. Similarly, on RJ Barrett, he's likely to give you around 40 minutes if this game's competitive. His salary has also increased to 6,800, so he's pulling about 9% ownership. I think he's comparable to like Tobias Harris, where you're not going out of your way to build around RJ Barrett at this salary, but if you land on him, that's fine. Jalen Brunson at 7,200 should be the most popular guy from this team. He averages about 33 minutes per game in the games without Derrick Rose this year. Rose no longer in the rotation, so it's likely you're getting 33, 34 minutes if this game's competitive from Brunson. He's a 1.15 fantasy point per minute guy, so that's going to make him look really good at 7,200. And then Mitchell Robinson's just another 5 to 6K center to throw into that sort of carousel of relatively high upside centers that look very similar to one another.
Anything else you want to mention from the Knicks here?
No, I don't think so. Quickly pulling 5% ownership, 4,500. Should play mid 20s off the bench, but again, somebody that was a lot more appealing on last night's slate than probably will be appealing tonight.
Yeah, and also wanted to shout out Mr. Shadow Dog 13 who posted in the YouTube chat that he tried out the tools for the first time last night we have on the site, and he came in third in the $1. I assume he means DraftKings, could be FanDuel, but either way, first, congrats to Mr. Shadow Dog, but also if anybody wants to be like Mr. Shadow Dog and try out our tools, 3-day free trial that we were talking about before, you can find the link to that below in the description box. The next game that we have here is the Indiana Pacers against the Boston Celtics, and Celtics out of nowhere kind of struggling a little bit as of late. Maybe some chemistry issues working Robert Williams back into the mix, but the Celtics, couple losses to the Magic as of late, something else that's contributed to it. Jason Tatum missed a game. He's going to be back in the mix. But as far as the Pacer side of the game goes, Adam, we've got Tyrese Halliburton. We know he's been terrific this year. There's been times we've gone to Miles Turner or Buddy Hield. I'm not sure anything is really massively appealing from the Pacers, though. And something that does impact this for me for sure is that Robert Williams being back in the mix for the Celtics, that's ultimately going to slow down their pace. It's going to improve their defense. I'm not going to say Halliburton's unplayable, but no real priorities for me. Do you feel any differently?
No, same boat. Just an Indiana team where typically I'm always willing to get to Tyrese Halliburton and Miles Turner, but this matchup does suck. They're 10-point dogs on the road against a team that is going to be even better defensively going forward with Robert Williams. So it's a situation where if you ever get to a 2% owned Miles Turner or, a 1% owned Tyrese Halliburton in tournaments, that's fine, but I don't think there's a lot of value on either guy. I really don't see anything from this team that stands out.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it as well. And when it comes to Halliburton, I've played a little bit of him on pretty much every single slate this year, and $9,500 on FanDuel, 1% ownership. DraftKings Halliburton is currently projected for 1% ownership at $9,600. So maybe if I was building 150 lineups out right now, I'd have more than 1% of them. But for most of you guys who are out there playing 1, 3 lineups, like Halliburton would just not be a consideration. There's other players I'd be paying up before him, and nothing real priorities from the other Pacers guys either. Is there anything else you want to mention from Indiana though? Any role players we should be keeping an eye on?
I don't really think so. Not on a slate this big.
Yeah, that's how I feel as well. And then on the Boston Celtics side of the game, Jason Tatum coming back. He missed the last game, was away from the team because of a personal issue. But we've got Marcus Smart listed as questionable. He's dealing with an illness. If Smart is not able to play, who are we going to be looking at for cheap, if anybody?
Um, so if Smart's not able to play, it should open up more minutes for Brogdon and White. Brogdon coming in at 5,100, White coming in at 3,900. Good matchup. Brogdon already pulling some ownership, likely to play 24 minutes or so off the bench. White, very inexpensive. He's not been consistent this year, and he hasn't been that good from a fantasy standpoint, but do think there's some merit in that cheap price tag and certainly would look better if Smart doesn't go.
And then one other thing I'm going to mention, Robert Williams is really cheap, particularly on DraftKings. He is currently $4,200 and $4,300 and picking up no ownership. He's at $4,300 right now. And I don't expect Robert Williams is going to be going out and playing 30 minutes or like that anytime soon. But 18 minutes in each of the last two games. Is there any way we get north of 20 from him? And just because the price point is so cheap, it makes him viable on DraftKings?
So yes and no. I wouldn't be surprised if he got north of 20 minutes. Played 18 minutes last game, like you said. But the other thing that stands out to me, and it was the first thing I wanted to look for, was whether or not he was playing minutes alongside Al Horford. Because if you were, for at least for now, obviously in the postseason it was going to be different. But for now, if you were going to just kind of ease Robert Williams in and make him the backup center behind Horford, then it's sort of just like, all right, well, he's not going to play more than 16 to 18 minutes. But he's playing plenty of minutes alongside Horford, which sort of just means that as soon as they want to ramp his minutes up, they can. It's not going to, cut into Horford. You don't have to figure out how that's going to work. The thing that makes it difficult, I think, to roster him in DFS, especially on this slate, is even if you get, let's say 22 minutes from Williams at 4,300, he's likely to give you a score that on the surface is good for 4,300. But when you start comparing him to all the other centers on this slate, you're probably just going to be giving up a lot in the way of raw points. Like even if he just goes out there, blocks a bunch of shots, puts up 30 DraftKings points, you're fine with that, but there's also just a good chance that that's not actually winning you anything. And then so that sort of doesn't make up for the downside being he plays 18 minutes, gets 20 fantasy points, and you're just dead. So if you're playing like this game as a showdown, I have no idea what the salary would be, but I think Williams is an interesting spot. If this were a smaller slate, like if this were at the end of the night and we could get this on like a 2-game night slate, I'd be really interested. But my biggest issue is just with it being an 11 gamer. The raw points are going to matter too much, probably.
Yeah, fair enough. And I guess my hope here is that Robert Williams doesn't get ramped up quite yet because I
Right.
really want to be early to Robert Williams rather than be late. Because I know there's going to be one of these games where he's like $4,300, he's 2% owned and puts up 40 fantasy points and nobody's on him. So I hope it's not today because I do agree that it might just be difficult and might just be suboptimal to get to him. But there's going to be a time where I know Robert Williams is going to go off a really low ownership. And I would like to be there when it happens, especially just because I like Robert Williams. But
Yeah. And
uh,
then he's going to be chalk for the next month once it happens because the price will be too slow to adjust.
yeah, at least a month anyway.
Yeah.
It'll
On
be the
FanDuel, he has power forward eligibility, but he's also 5K.
so you know what actually is going to happen, Adam? He's going to have a really big night, and he's going to be cheaper the next slate.
Yeah, that actually is how it normally works out. But we finally got the Jaden Ivey game last night, and now he's $200 less.
Yeah, so we'll see how that ends up happening. Anything else you want to talk about from the Celtics? We've got Jason Tatum coming back, Jaylen Brown also being a potential pay up option in a game that has a very high total.
Yeah, I mean, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum goes without saying. If you can get to either guy, great. Neither one looks like a priority here with Brown pulling 5% ownership, Tatum pulling 3. But it is a good matchup. And, clearly there's blowout risk here, just like in the Philly game. But if this game ends up being a blowout, it's very likely that Brown or Tatum put up a big game. The issue is just sort of like I'm going to have a hard time, especially with the way ownership looks right now. So you're not even getting like an ownership discount. I'm going to have a hard time paying 11K for Tatum when I can pay 10-4 for an unknown Siakam if I'm looking for, a high upside contrarian play.
All right, so let's move on to the next game where we have the Chicago Bulls on the road against the Atlanta Hawks, two teams that were very much expected to make the playoffs coming into the year and are both kind of on the fringes of the playoffs right now. We've got the Bulls just on the outside, Hawks just on the inside. The Bulls, we've got the same conundrum we typically have: DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic. These guys all individually have shown to have upside at times. They're also playing on the tail end of a back-to-back here. They're in Atlanta on the road. Game should be fairly fast paced, though, 235.5 total. Javonte Green is listed as questionable. Derek Jones questionable. I don't think either of them have massive impact on the rotation, though. As far as DeRozan, Levine, Vooch go, do any of the three payoff options from Chicago stand out above the others to you?
I think they all kind of just look similar, especially Vooch and Levine. 7,100 for Vooch, 7,200 for Levine with shooting guard and small forward eligibility. 19% ownership coming to Levine, 22 to Vooch. They both look good. I think you can always argue when you're getting a center in Vooch's price range that that's popular, that they're a little bit overowned in terms of their chances of being optimal, just because there are so many good center options. And so, like right now we have Vooch being optimal 14% of the time, but that's still a relatively high percentage for an 11 game slate. And it's going to make him look like a good play. Pretty appealing matchup here against Atlanta as well. So those guys look good. Then I think it's a little bit of a drop off to 8,500 DeRozan just because he is $1,300 more than Levine and Vooch. You get some potential value here with Patrick Williams and Alex Caruso both being cheap. Probably going to be better value as we get further into the day, but you should get 30 to 32 minutes from Williams, likely to get around 28 to 30 from Caruso. So I can see, them getting into lineups as value. One spot that I do think is interesting, and this will surprise nobody, if Derek Jones and Javonte Green are both out, you should fully expect Andre Drummond to get all of the backup center minutes. I think there's a decent chance he would here anyway, since you're going up against normally I would say there's a good chance he would against Atlanta, but with Capella out, you're likely to get Collins followed by Okongwu. So I'm not sure exactly how they would handle it if Jones and Green are in. But if they're out, you should get Drummond back to playing 14, 15 minutes. And again, the opportunity cost is really high, but at $3,100, there is some upside there if those guys are out.
One thing I'm a little concerned with when it comes to Drummond, by the way, I think you've been definitely on point about targeting him at low ownership and large field GPPs, is I don't know that he's guaranteed to be in the rotation anymore. He was a DNP 2 games ago. He played 7 minutes last game, but I'm fairly sure it happened after Derek Jones got hurt. Like you said, this would be contingent on Derek Jones and Javonte Green both being out. But is there potential that Drummond is getting pinched from the rotation?
Yeah, so we've been seeing that for a bit now, where against non-traditional backup centers, they've been going to Derek Jones more and more frequently. And then, if you get Javonte Green back, it's even easier to do that. So, like, if they're in, you could get Drummond here, depending on what rotation Atlanta goes with. Like, if you go with the one they did last game where you have Collins and then Okongwu backing him up. The last time they played Atlanta, Drummond did play the backup minutes and go up against Okongwu. But here, it's a little bit more complicated because Collins is more of a stretch five. So I don't think they would want Drummond out there for any minutes that Collins is out there, at least. So I think it's a situation where if Green and Jones are in, I wouldn't go to Drummond. I'd be pretty hesitant to do so. But if they're both out, I fully expect him to get those backup minutes.
And then let's talk about the Hawks side of the game, because like you just mentioned, Clint Capella is out. The only player who's out for the Hawks because DeJounte Murray, he's back from injury. DeAndre Hunter, he's back in the mix. As far as the center minutes go, I know there was a point in time there where we were really targeting Onyeka Okongwu when Clint Capella's out, but his price has gone up at this point. Is Okongwu somebody who still appeals to it all in tournaments?
Not particularly, especially because I'm expecting him to come off the bench. If they go back to the bigger starting lineup where they go with Collins at the 4 and Okongwu at the 5, then I think Okongwu does have appeal at 4,900. But they last game started John Collins at center. That was against the Magic, who are going with Bol and Mo Wagner in their front court. So I'm expecting that you just see that same starting lineup here. The Hawks also won that game, so Typically, I assume teams aren't going to change it up. But if Okongwu starts, I'm interested. He did still play 28 minutes off the bench last game, but Collins, I think, had some foul issues. Also, it was just actually didn't have foul issues, but it was his first game back. So I just assume he was limited to 20 minutes more or less, and he probably plays more here. So it makes me hesitant to get to Okongwu.
And then as far as the pay up guys, we've got Trey Young, we've got DeJounte Murray. Young was obviously put in a better spot from a usage and then potential assist standpoint when DeJounte Murray was out. With Murray back in the picture, is Trey Young still somebody you're looking to get to? And also, how does Murray look for the slate?
Yeah, so with Murray back, you can still certainly get to Trey Young. He's actually, from a fantasy standpoint, been better this year in the games that he's played with Murray than without. I don't think that is an indication that that would be a long-term trend, but it just sort of reinforces that it's not like it's a huge knock on Trey Young. He is expensive, but he should play 36 minutes or so. So he looks like another pretty low-owned, high upside tournament option. DeJounte Murray came back, played 37 and a half minutes. So unlike John Collins, who I'm very interested in if I knew he was going to get full run, but I don't feel good about the 20 minutes he played last game. For DeJounte Murray at 8,600 playing full minutes, I do think he actually looks like a pretty interesting target in tournaments.
Yeah, so I think you definitely make a case for that because I hadn't really looked too closely at the minutes from last game. But yeah, like you said, he had, and it was a fairly long layoff for DeJounte Murray as well. He didn't play for 2 weeks and just 38 minutes right off the bat, which, by the way, is more or less what he was playing before going down 38 minutes, 36, 39, 41. So right back at it for DeJounte Murray. I think that does make a whole lot of sense. We've got Bogdanovic actually did stick in the starting lineup last game. Is that something, number one, that you expect? And then number two, assuming Bogdanovic starts, is he somebody who's at all appealing to you in tournaments?
Yeah, so that's the piece that we do need to keep an eye on because I'm expecting they go with Bogdanovic, but if they did move Okongwu back into the starting lineup, it would most likely be in place of Bogdanovic with Hunter and Collins each moving up a position. So if that happens, then Bogdanovic should lose a couple of minutes in terms of projection. I still have a hard time really getting him at 6,500 now that Murray is back, just because you're going to be playing a lot of minutes alongside both Murray and Young, and you're basically not going to get a single minute, most likely, where neither of them are on the floor because Atlanta typically staggers their minutes. So previously, you were getting Bogdanovic playing around 33% of his minutes without Trey Young or DeJounte Murray, which is just going to be great for him. Now he's likely to step back into that role we've seen more frequently last year, where he's around a 20% usage guy. His job is, just to kind of play make when necessary, knock down threes when Trey Young passes him the ball, but he's likely to play a much smaller role now that we have DeJounte Murray back.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And yeah, nothing else to add for me for this game. How about for you?
Um, if we happen to get news on John Collins, I do like him here. 5,700 power forward eligibility, assuming he's playing center. Center minutes have always been very, very productive fantasy wise for John Collins. I just don't know what to read into that rotation last game. He played about 13 minutes in the first half, but then only got to 20. He subbed out with 4 minutes to go in the game. If you told me that Collins isn't on a minutes restriction and he can play 30 minutes here, I would like him. I'm just really concerned by the fact he only played 20 minutes last game.
Next, we're going to be talking about potentially one of the most shorthanded teams of the entire slate, the Golden State Warriors, who have Dante DiVincenzo listed as questionable. He's dealing with an illness, but the players who are out, Steph Curry, we know about his injury. Klay Thompson, tail end of a back-to-back, so he's going to be resting. They've got Andrew Wiggins remaining doubtful. JaMychal Green now also doubtful for the Golden State Warriors. This is a team that might have very, very few bodies out there. Jordan Poole, we know he's going to soak up a whole lot of usage. But who are the cheap guys you think you might be looking to get to from Golden State?
Yeah, so I mean, this comes with the caveat that Steve Kerr is going to start whoever the hell he wants, but whoever's starting is going to look interesting. Kuminga's coming in at 5K. If he comes off the bench, he's playable. If he starts, you can feel better about his minutes. Jordan Poole at 8,200 should just be out there chucking up shots every time he touches the ball. Moses Moody played about 32 minutes yesterday. He's 3,300. Not a good point per minute guy, but shooting guard, small forward, going to project as a pretty good point per dollar value. It's just a matter of what other value opens up on the slate. Then we kind of have to wait and see, does Draymond play? Does DiVincenzo come back? Looney, I assume, is going to start, but based on what they do with everyone else, you can get a better sense of if Looney's going to start the second half or just the first half. So all of that stuff, is still a pretty big question mark right now. James Wiseman's 3K. So if you do get a situation where, they rest Draymond, they sit DiVincenzo, and there's a decent chance that Looney is only going to play 6 minutes to start the game and keep his game streak intact and then go away. 3K for Wiseman has the potential to look very good by the time we get the lock.
And I'll add this: if Draymond Green ends up getting ruled out, and actually didn't Looney miss a game recently?
Did he?
Let me see. Oh no, he didn't. Never mind. He might have been questionable as a game, so disregard that. But so Looney, to what you mentioned before, he has this long games played streak that for whatever reason him and the Warriors really give a shit about. So in games where we've seen the entire team get ruled out, they have Looney start, but like you alluded to, he only plays the first couple of minutes. If Draymond Green rests, I love this spot for James Wiseman because I think Looney would probably start. He'd probably play like 4 minutes, 3 minutes, or something like that. And Wiseman would play a whole bunch of minutes as the center. Something else also. This game is the most lopsided spread of the entire slate. The Nets are now favored by 12.5 points. This game is very live to be a blowout, and Wiseman is going to play all the blowout run. The Warriors are trying to get him reps on the court. Wiseman is not going to be popular today, at least not per our current ownership projections. We got Wiseman sub 10% on DraftKings at the flat min price. On FanDuel, Wiseman is $3,700 projected for 4% ownership. I think there's a lot of potential for him, particularly in garbage time against backups as a decent fantasy producer. And I know the Warriors are going to do what they can to try to get a minute. So as of right now, Wiseman's actually one of my favorite low-owned tournament plays.
Yeah, I'm there with you. And he's another one, I mentioned we spent time on that entire backup Chicago rotation. But if you're going to get 3K James Wiseman with a decent chance and a sizable role here, that's just going to look better than Drummond anyway.
Yeah, so Wiseman's somebody that I'm definitely circling. And then as for other guys, we just kind of need to see what the starting lineup looks like for the Warriors. But if DiVincenzo doesn't end up playing, I just don't see a way that guys like Kuminga and Moody wouldn't rate out as good value plays. I know these are guys who have not been good point spread fantasy producers this year, but you just get to a certain point where if everybody's out for the Warriors, somebody's going to shoot the ball. Somebody's going to have to put up stats. And Kuminga and Moody are at least two of the cheap guys that I feel best about getting minutes.
Yeah, and if DiVincenzo is out here, knowing that Clay is also out, there's a decent chance you get $3,500 Ty Jerome in the starting lineup, which typically means mid-20s in minutes. So there's potential for him to end up looking like a good value. There's a lot of ways this can break where you end up with a lot of value coming out of Golden State.
On the net side of the game, unless do you have anything else you want to talk about from Golden State?
No, I mean there will be more to say later, but hopefully once we get an injury report, we'll probably have more to talk about.
Yeah, so check out the deep dive, check out Live Before Lock later, guys, because we're going to have a better sense of some of those value options. Now, from the Nets, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, these guys individually always have upside, but it's been a minute since I've really targeted them heavily. Kyrie Irving, I was trying to play when he was priced down to 8K, but that salary's come up a little bit. And then Kevin Durant now is $10,600 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's $10,500. As far as Kyrie and Durant go, if you guys were to get to them here and there over the course of a bunch of lineups, I wouldn't have an issue with it. I'm just not going to be prioritizing them or anything else from the Nets tonight.
Yeah, I don't think I'm prioritizing anything here, but I do think there's some interesting spots in tournaments because, for one, this is going to be a good matchup against Golden State. They're a fast-paced team. They're shorthanded. Yeah, there's blowout risk, but you should see good point per minute production. It's just a matter of can Golden State hang in the game or not. It's similar to last night's game with the Knicks, where Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle were well on their way to being guys that you needed in tournaments. They just happened to not get the fourth quarter. If Golden State keeps it, 10, 12, 13 points, and those guys had to play the fourth quarter, they were going to be great plays. It's the same sort of thing here. Yes, it's a 12-point spread, but 12-point, if you assume this game ends with a 12-point difference, they're not all created equally. If it's just 12 points throughout the entire game, you're getting pretty much full minutes. If it's 30 points and then, by the end of the game, it whittles down to 12, then you lost the fourth quarter. But Kyrie coming in at 8,800. Kyrie coming in at 8,800, clearly a high ceiling there. Same goes for Durant at 10,500. The spot that I'm really, really interested in is Ben Simmons at 6,200. He only played 24 minutes last game, but he had played about 32 the game before that. So we know he's not on a minutes restriction anymore. You just got a really weird rotation last game from Brooklyn where Simmons didn't close the first half, just kind of played abbreviated stints. I don't really know what to make of that rotation, but I think going forward, the more often than not, you're getting 30 plus minutes from Ben Simmons. And at 6,200 power forward eligible with no ownership in a game that is likely to be a track meet with not much defense being played, I think Ben Simmons is a really interesting tournament play.
Yeah, and the other thing too is so we haven't because Ben Simmons over the last couple weeks he's been in and out of the lineup, injuries, rest. He was finally starting to play really well before he got hurt in the tail end of November. So if you go and look at him before the knee soreness, he 34 minutes, 34 fantasy points, 34 minutes, 33 fantasy points, 33 minutes, 35 fantasy points, 48 fantasy points, 39 fantasy points, 45 fantasy points. And you're starting to get this sense of like, oh, Ben Simmons has worked himself back into form. Then unfortunately deals with the knee issue, comes back, and just we haven't seen the same fantasy production since. But like you said, 32 minutes a couple of games ago. If there was a spot to really try to get Ben Simmons right, there's going to be very little resistance against this Warriors team.
Yeah, exactly. And like he burned me last slate. I just think there's a decent chance that I'm prone to get burned here again. I jammed him in last slate because like every site had him projected for like 25 minutes and I couldn't figure out why. It turns out he played a weird ass rotation and played 25 minutes, but it just I think that going forward, you're just going to see more 30-minute games from Simmons. Like that's what he was playing before his injury. There's no reason to think that long term that isn't the plan. They've still been starting him alongside Claxton, so it's not like he's just playing backup center. I don't really know why he wouldn't play 30 minutes more often than not here, especially if it's a competitive game.
Yeah, I think that does make I think it does make a good deal of sense. Is there anything else that you want to talk about from the Nets?
Claxton also high ceiling, but he is center only, so it's more difficult to get there.
All right, so let's talk about the next game that we have on the slate, which is the Dallas Mavericks against the Minnesota Timberwolves. So, when it comes to Luka Doncic, generally the way that I have approached him this year is he's been easier to get to on FanDuel than he has on DraftKings. But for DraftKings slates, it just depends how much value opens up, and that's what depends on how easy it is to get to Luka. Because if he's on a slate, he's always projecting for a shit ton of fantasy points, but he's also really expensive and sometimes could be difficult to get to. For today, though, Luka $12,600 on DraftKings and projected for 1% ownership. FanDuel 11,800 projected for 6% ownership. Him being 11.8 on FanDuel and only projected for 6% ownership, that seems crazy low to me because this is one of the rare slates that we've had where, despite the high price tag for Luka, I think it's going to be viable to get to him, especially with all the Golden State value. Luka looks like he's going overlooked by the field.
Yeah, I mean, I agree because I think it is going to be pretty easy to get to him if you want to, and he's not getting ownership. The thing that concerns me, though, is that this strikes me as a slate where even with that value, I'm more likely to be living in that like 8 to 10K range than looking to pay all the way up for Luca because you do have Shea Gilgeous-Alexander playing without Giddy. You have James Harden, you have LaMelo, you have Lillard, you have Young, you have Kyrie, Fox, Mitchell, Halliburton, Poole, Murray. Like, there's so many guys here where and there's more on this slate too. There's so many guys where it's just like, all right, they can very realistically go for 50, 60 fantasy points at, $2,000 to $4,000 less than Luca. So that's sort of the issue to me is just that I'm probably still going to end up preferring lineups where I drop from Luca down to one of these other really high upside guards. But that being said, if you get to Luca, great. He's going to project as one of the highest scorers, if not the highest scorer on the slate. It's a good matchup and all of that. It's just that the 8 to 10K guard range is so strong on this slate.
Yeah, also potential for the matchup to be a little bit easier if Rudy Gobert misses another game. He's currently listed as questionable on the other side of this. But talking about the other guys on the Mavericks, Kemba Walker's in the mix now. He's somebody who's going to take up usage during the time that he's out on the court. But also Christian Wood. We finally saw Christian Wood get a start last game. Dwight Powell's listed as questionable again, and the other players who are out for Dallas, Maxi Kleber out, Josh Green out, Dorian Finney-Smith also out. What do all these injuries mean for the potential upside of Christian Wood?
So if Powell is out, you should get Christian Wood in the starting lineup again. And if that's the case, he's likely to play a ton of minutes. Played 34 and a half last game, lost about 3 minutes to garbage time. He had played, I think, 38 minutes in his start the game before that. So I expect 36 plus minutes from him if he is starting in place of Powell. If Powell is in, I think you're still probably getting around 32 from Christian Wood, which is still makes them viable. 8,100 is getting a little bit expensive, but power forward center on DraftKings, especially if he's starting, he's going to look really good. We talked about Luka. Dinwiddie at 6,400 is actually interesting to me as well. I think you see more playing time from him going forward, at least in the short term, because of Dallas being shorthanded. Now you also don't have Dorian Finney-Smith. You still don't have Josh Green. You're taking Maxi Kleber's 26 minutes away. So basically what has to happen is, Reggie Bullock is going to step up and play a lot more minutes to fill in for Kleber and Finney-Smith. You're going to see Davis Bertans most likely in the rotation, soaking up some of those Kleber minutes as well. Kemba is going to be in the rotation too, but you're just going to need Dinwiddie to play more than the 30 to 32 minutes that he's been playing when this team is healthy. You got 38 minutes last game. That's in part because Luka got ejected. Dinwiddie subbed right back in after going to the bench when he was ejected, but he played about 17 minutes in the first half. I think you're likely to get 34 to 36 minutes from Dinwiddie at 6,400, which is going to look like a good price tag, even given that he is playing alongside Luka.
Yeah, I could make a case for that as well. And any of the other role players that you might want to be getting to from Dallas with all the players that are out with injury?
So one thing to mention, Tim Hardaway Jr. is not on the injury report today. He was out last game, so he can soak up some of those those minutes that Finney-Smith's leaving as well. But the point stands where I think getting around 34 minutes from Dinwiddie makes sense. As far as the other value pieces, not really. 5,300 for Hardaway. I think you could see a couple more minutes for him as well. But for me, it's Christian Wood, if he's starting, is going to look good. I'm very interested in Dinwiddie, especially if he's only going to pull 4% ownership.
On the other side of the game, when it comes to the Timberwolves, we once again have Rudy Gobert listed as questionable. I have to think he's getting close to a return. Kyle Anderson also questionable. So Naz Reid has been really good in some of the spot starts for Gobert. Now, one of them he was not good, but it was solely because he left the game due to an injury. He's more expensive now. He's $5,900 on DraftKings, been priced up to $6,600 on FanDuel. But is this still a playable price points for Naz Reid if he's starting at center?
If he's starting, yeah, it's not a free square like it has been the last couple of slates. There is more downside risk when you're getting Reid at between 4 and 5K. It's kind of just like, all right, as long as he doesn't get hurt, he's gonna beat this price tag. Now at 5,900, there is at least some opportunity cost there. He's not less expensive than a lot of these other centers, but he's playing huge minutes in these starts as well. Going back to last season, in games he started, he's averaged around 28 to 29 minutes. But this year he played 36, then he played 40, ignoring the game where he got hurt in the first half. But you're getting huge playing time. He's playing really, really well. He's well over a fantasy point per minute player in general. At 5,900, if he's starting, I still think he's a good play, just obviously not as good as when he was $1,000 less.
And then if Rudy Gobert does end up playing, which I do think is probably more likely than not, it doesn't seem like this is a really significant injury. He's dealing with a slight ankle sprain and has been close to a game time decision the last couple of games. Gobert is currently priced at $7,500 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he's priced at $8,000. Not picking up ownership, but a lot of that's due with the questionable tag. A little uncertain what the ownership would be if he was to get upgraded. I think this could be a really good matchup for him if Christian Wood is starting on the other side. Christian Wood is absolute dog shit on defense. Rudy Gobert, is this somebody we should be looking at as a potential center option if he is starting and good to go?
Yeah, so if he's in, he wouldn't be my favorite option, but I do think it would be another spot you can look to as a potential pretty similar pivot away from Nikola Vucevic, who, again, I like Vuce, but there's just going to be a lot of comparable looking centers. And I think Gobert is one if he's able to go. It is a good matchup, like you said. If he's in, I assume he's not going to be limited. So unless we hear otherwise, I would treat it like that's the case. And a lot would depend on ownership, but I think it's likely that you would get a pretty big gap between him and Vooch, and it would make Gobert an interesting pivot.
And then as for the other pay up options on Minnesota, Anthony Edwards has some massive games as of late, probably actually on the best stretch of his career right now. Peripheral stats, defensive stats, they've all been there. He kind of went from 0 to 100 really quick as far as his fantasy production has gone as of late. So Edwards has played well. Russell, somebody else who's also having the ball in his hands more now with Karl Anthony Towns out. Is there anything else that stands out to you from Minnesota?
Russell and Edwards both look good enough in tournaments, but again, not really priorities, relatively low owned. Russell, 7,500, should play more minutes once again with Jordan McLaughlin out. That's been the trend all season long. If Gobert is out, it is a little bit of a bump for Anthony Edwards. Spaces the floor better. You see the true shooting increase for Anthony Edwards without Gobert on the floor. So the ceiling is there one way or the other, but I do think Edwards is a little bit more likely to hit it if Gobert's out.
And then with Kyle Anderson being questionable, is there anything we should be keeping our eye on if Anderson is not able to play?
If he's not able to play, you should get more minutes from Jaden McDaniels. I assume you would get Austin Rivers in the starting lineup and playing a lot of minutes as well. That piece isn't particularly interesting, but yeah, and then also if Anderson's out, maybe stabilizes Jalen Noel's minutes a little bit, but I still think that he's mostly impacted by D'Angelo Russell. So I still wouldn't be going more than like 24, 25 minutes on Noel.
Anything else you want to talk about for Minnesota?
No.
All right, so let's tell people a couple of really good ways that you can get some value, and another way to get in the door at Stokastic for a very, very cheap price point. Because a couple of things: BetMGM and Prize Picks. So if you're in a state that has legal sports betting, if you haven't signed up at BetMGM, here's a couple of reasons that you should be doing it. When you do sign up and make a minimum $10 deposit, you're going to get 2 free months of Stokastic Plus Platinum. But in addition to that, your first bet will be risk free up to $1,000. So first bet loses, you get refunded up to $1,000. But also 2 free months, like I said, is Stokastic Plus Platinum. All you have to do when you sign up is use our link, and that is going to get you those 2 free months after your first bet settles. Prize Picks. If you are in a state that does not have legal sports betting, there's a pretty good chance that Prize Picks operates in your state. And if you sign up at Prize Picks, you are going to get 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum when you sign up using our link. But also, you're going to get a deposit bonus of up to $100 when you use our link over at Prize Picks. So, a lot of good value to get involved in sports betting here. If you're in a state where it's legal, you've got BetMGM. If you're in a state that isn't legal, pretty good chance you play those player props over at Prize Picks. And we do have projections for all the different player props that are available at stokastic.com that you guys could use to build winning player prop cards over at Prize Picks. Just make sure if you guys are signing up at either BetMGM or Prize Picks, use our links when you sign up so you get credited for those free months of our Platinum Pass when you do make your account. All right, let's hit on the next game, the Portland Trailblazers against the Oklahoma City Thunder. And Adam, for Portland, Yusuf Nurkic is listed as questionable. He did not play last game, which made me immediately think like, okay, Drew Eubanks, great play, somebody we should really be getting to. But then all this other center value ended up opening up on DraftKings to where I didn't really end up playing Drew Eubanks. On FanDuel, he had power forward eligibility, which made him easier to get to. But for DraftKings, just kind of get stuck in that spot where it's like, hey, there's a lot of good center plays. It was hard for me to get to Drew Eubanks. So if Nurkic is ruled out, how are you going to be handling Eubanks tonight?
Yeah, that was the same issue I had as well. I ended up doing the same exact thing. I think I had like 6% on DraftKings and like 92% on FanDuel. It's just another example of how playing multiple sites is nice because you're not intentionally hedging. You're not saying like, oh, well, I don't have Eubanks on DraftKings, so I'm going to jam him in on FanDuel. It just naturally happens in a lot of spots like that, which is nice from a diversification standpoint. But if Nurkic is out, I expect Eubanks to start. Did play 32 minutes last game, which is more than you typically get from him. I think on average, you expect 26 to 28 minutes as a starter. He is still inexpensive, so at 4,200, he would certainly be a reasonable value, but you still have that opportunity cost issue, like you were saying on DraftKings, whereas he will be easier to get to on FanDuel, assuming he still has power forward eligibility. If Nurkic is in, I think he looks like another pretty interesting tournament target. Only 6,800 going up against an Oklahoma City team that he should be able to destroy. The scary part of this for Nurk, if he's in, is that with Portland fully healthy, you could very easily get a closing lineup against OKC that has Justice Winslow in place of Nurkic, but that doesn't have to be the case. Like if Nurkic is torching this front court, Portland can just say, okay, cool, they'll deal with it, and leave him in. It's more so if Nurkic is like not playing great, they might go with Winslow, but if he's not playing great, he wasn't going to win you anything anyway. So I would really like Nurkic in tournaments if he's good to go.
Yeah, and still remains to be seen. He's officially listed as questionable, as we were mentioning before. Now, the rest of the team is good to go. So we got Damian Lillard, Jeremy Grant, Josh Hart, Drew Eubanks. They all listed on the injury report, but they're all probable, so no real concerns there. Lillard, is he at all appealing to you as a pay-up option?
He's appealing in the same way that like Trae Young is appealing and Pascal Siakam's appealing. None of them, and this sort of reiterates why none of them are getting a lot of ownership, because if you're looking to go for a contrarian very high upside play in this price range, there's still nothing really separating Lillard from Young from Siakam. It's just a matter of getting lucky basically on which one of them goes out there and scores 60 plus DraftKings points, because they're all certainly capable of it. But yeah, Dame 10-6, that he's got a massive ceiling here. If Nurkic is out, that is a little bit more usage for him as well. pulling 2% ownership. Like, it's not even that I think he should be higher owned. He's just another piece where it's like, okay, well, I have a bunch of popular plays in my lineup. I can round it out with Damian Lillard, and you're clearly not sacrificing any ceiling to do so.
Anything else you want to talk about from Portland?
The rest of the team sort of looks like decent low-owned tournament plays as well. Like, all of Simons, Grant, Hart have decent upside here and are reasonably priced, but there's not one guy that stands out as looking that good.
From the Thunder, we've got Josh Giddey. He remains out with an illness. Darius Baisley, he's out. And they've got the long-term absences for Usman Jang and Jeremiah Robinson are also. For me, on a slate of the size, it's going to be SGA or bust. I think that he is a pay-up option. Looks great in the absence of Josh Giddey. As for the rest of the players, Lou Dort, I guess the minutes are fairly secure there, but he's not the best fantasy producer in the world. And then the role players, it's just impossible to project the minutes. I'm probably going to go elsewhere when I'm looking for value tonight. But for you, Adam, number one, do you like SGA? And then are there any value guys you like from OKC?
Yeah, I do like SGA. This is a situation where, like, I think of these 10K to like 10-6 guys we've talked about, SGA is the one I like the most. But at the same time, and just sort of reiterates building from an individual lineup standpoint, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is not 10-1 to beat Damian Lillard. He's not 5-1 to beat Trae Young. He's not, 20-1 to beat Pascal Siakam. You can pivot away from SGA to any of those guys, and it's going to still be a strong move. It's just that when you look at total exposure, I expect to have more of SGA because he does project better than that group. He's playing without Josh Giddey, which has been very good for him in the past. He's the one guy on this team you can count on to play 35, 36 minutes. It's a good enough spot. Everything looks good for SGA. Poku, 4,600. It's like no matter who's out for this team, he still plays 24 minutes. There's some appeal just because if he does get 28, 30 minutes, he's going to be a really good option. But if he's going to pull 28% ownership, then I'm probably just not going to get to a lot because I'm going to keep projecting 24 minutes because that's what they keep doing. Jalen Williams is playing 30 plus minutes pretty consistently, but not a great point per minute guy. Same goes for Lou Dort. There's not a lot I want here outside of SGA.
Yeah, that's how I feel as well. And it's just been a fool's errand to try to project the minutes here. And even the starting lineup doesn't mean anything because OKC very regularly is a different starting lineup in the second half than the first. So let's move on to Orlando Magic against the Houston Rockets. And some pretty big injury news for Orlando because Franz Wagner is questionable. In the Magic last game, he ended up getting hurt with like 3 seconds left in the game. So we just stayed on the court, but he was holding his ankle. He was clearly a little bit gimpy. If he's not able to play, what ends up happening to Orlando? Who would benefit?
Yeah, so I'm curious to see who would end up starting in his place. I don't know if they would throw Terrence Ross in there as like a placeholder type guy, or if they would go to Cole Anthony. But it does have the potential to open up quite a bit in terms of playing time, especially for Cole Anthony. Even if he comes off the bench, if Franz Wagner is out, I think he would get more playing time from Anthony, who's only 5K. It would make him look like a good option. Markelle Fultz is up to 5,700. He played 33 minutes last game. Once again, if this guy doesn't get hurt, the game is competitive. He doesn't get in foul trouble. You're typically getting 30 plus minutes. He's about a fantasy point per minute guy. 1.2 since the start of last year. It's been down a bit this year, but rising price tag, still getting some ownership. I think he still looks pretty good here. And I think he would also look better if Franz Wagner is out.
Yeah, and Fultz also has had some massive ceilings as of late that we've seen from him. So last game, it was the high watermark for him on the year. Or actually, not even. He scored 47 fantasy points, but there was a game last week where he scored 47.75. And I mean, you just look at some of these games from the last four now 47, 27, 27, and then 47.75 there. So there's a clear ceiling for Markelle Fultz. And I don't even read too much into his points from a fantasy production from this year because he had the fractured toe. He came back. He missed the start of the year. They just kind of threw him right into the mix right away. And I think it makes sense that he wouldn't have quite the same fantasy production to start the year. And over the last week, it's been back. He's shown massive ceiling. So I'm with you. I know you've sung the praise of Markelle Fultz as a tournament play a good amount over the last month. And I think we should be getting on board with that again, especially because the matchup against the Rockets couldn't be better.
Yeah, fast-paced game. Everything looks good there. And I think it was you on a previous show that mentioned as well that Markelle Fultz wasn't getting as many steals or defensive stats this year. Now his steal rate has corrected. He's at 2.4 steals per 100 possessions this year, 2.5 since the start of last year. But that is another thing that we've seen sort of bring up his point per minute production. And going forward, you can certainly see it increase a bit as well.
You know, something like his first 8 games of the year, he had only had 3 games of the defensive stat where he's been somebody who's, done well in that department in the past. And it's just little things like that where it's like, oh, well, what's the difference between somebody averaging point 0.4 steals or like 1.2 or something like that? In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't seem that big, but it's a couple extra fantasy points per game. So it's stuff like that that's all coming together for Markel Fultz. Now, anything else that we should be looking at if Franz Wagner is not able to play?
Um, no, I mean, I think Anthony would benefit. I think he would end up looking good at 5K. You could argue that maybe Banchero looks a little bit better, but you still are going to have probably a lot of Markel Fultz and Cole Anthony on the floor who are high usage guys as well. So I don't think that you necessarily see that much of a bump for Banchero if Wagner's out, but maybe a little bit.
Marcus Smart remains questionable. Really a non-update. I don't need an update to tell me that he was questionable before and he's still questionable, but that is news that just came across. Houston Rockets on the other side of the game going up against the Orlando Magic. As far as Houston game goes, 223.5 is a fairly low total for Houston. So individual guys, Jalen Green, Kevin Porter, Şengün, we've seen these guys with upside, but no real priorities for me from the Rockets today. Do you feel any differently?
It's kind of a team that just looks pretty similar across the board for me. Like there's a lot of guys that I think I'll be getting to, but there's not one that stands out in particular. And that's kind of how it's looked recently. 7,100 for Kevin Porter Jr., 7,200 for Jalen Green. They're both around the fantasy point per minute. Kevin Porter Jr. slightly higher. They both play 34 to 35 minutes typically. It is kind of surprising that right now Kevin Porter Jr. is getting twice as much ownership as Jalen Green because I think they're very, very, very similar plays. Alperen Şengün is down to $5,700. He should give you 27 minutes or so if this game's competitive. That's too cheap of a price tag for him. Eric Gordon at 3,500, really shitty fantasy producer, around 2/3 of a fantasy point per minute, but you're typically going to get around 28, 30 minutes from him. He's only 3,500. Tari Eason's going to play the backup minutes to Jabari Smith. Eason's 3,400, 1.1 DraftKings points per minute. You just need Jabari Smith to play poorly and or get in foul trouble. But we also saw some Tari Eason alongside Jabari Smith last game, which is really interesting because if they keep going that route, then Eason's going to be a really good play for a week until they change pricing. They didn't do it in the first half. Eason just played as Jabari Smith's backup, but in the second half, they did play about 6 minutes alongside each other. So I'm not projecting that as the most likely outcome here, but if they do start giving Jabari Smith a little bit of run at the 5 and giving Tari Eason some minutes alongside him, that's going to make Eason start to look really good really quick.
Anything else you want to talk about from Houston?
No.
All right, so let's hit on the Los Angeles Lakers, and this is a team that's going to bring about some interesting talking points because Anthony Davis, he was having arguably the best year of his career, and now he's out for just a really long time. Austin Reeves is doubtful. Juan Toscano Anderson is out. LeBron James is going to be playing today, but Russell Westbrook is questionable. So we haven't really gotten to see many games of LeBron James this year when he's been healthy without Anthony Davis. LeBron to me is somebody that is going to be a really, really high priority pay up option, but the field sees it the exact same way. So LeBron James tonight is projected for only 11% ownership on FanDuel, but he's also been priced up a little bit there. On DraftKings, though, where he is woefully underpriced at $9,900, he is the most popular play on the slate, projected for 39% ownership. And I totally agree with it, especially Russell Westbrook is out. But do you agree with all the chalk going to LeBron?
Yeah, it's kind of similar to the Gilgeous-Alexander spot for me, I think. LeBron is somebody that I would expect to get a lot of exposure to across, 150 lineups just because he's going to project as one of the best plays. He's very, very clearly underpriced for Davis to be out. He's averaged 1.5 DraftKings points per minute without Davis on the floor this year. You're likely to get 35 or 36 minutes from him. It's an appealing matchup against Sacramento. If Westbrook misses as well, James is up to about 1.57 DraftKings points per minute without him or Davis on the floor. At the same time, he's not 10-1 against Trae Young or Pascal Siakam or any of those guys. So in an individual lineup, if you already have chalky pieces in there and you want to pivot to a very, very good player that is just not named LeBron James, that's a really viable approach. But I would still expect to be prioritizing LeBron just because I think I'm going to be able to find better edges on a slate like this than saying, I'm just going to not play LeBron James without Anthony Davis against the Kings. That's not really the spot where I want to take a huge stand overall.
And then who else is going to be benefiting from the Lakers in the absence of Anthony Davis? Between Thomas Bryant, he was massively popular the other day. He is now $5,300 on DraftKings, $6,100 on FanDuel. Would you still consider that a good value price for Thomas Bryant?
I think he's still a good value. I think he's easier to get away from than LeBron is, just because he is center only. He's 5,300, so that's still a very reasonable price. But like, is he really that different than Mitchell Robinson or Brook Lopez or a number of other guys? You know, Naz Reid obviously would cut into his ownership if Gobert is out, but at the center position, there's just so much opportunity cost because you don't even have to stay in that price range. Like, let's just say you go to a different price point, find value elsewhere. So I think Bryant's a good value. I still think he's underpriced. He's over a fantasy point per minute guy. He's likely to play 30 to 32 minutes if this game's competitive, but it's a center. You know, we've seen it a lot recently where, you know, Daniel Gafford last night, very good production for his salary, didn't help you win anything. We've seen it with Thomas Bryant recently where, you know, he goes out there and gets 25, 30 DraftKings points and it's good for his salary, but you get other centers on the slate that go for 60 and you're just screwed because you have Bryant. So at this ownership, that's a spot where I think I'd be actually more likely to get away from than LeBron, even though the salary is so cheap and he is still underpriced.
And then from the Lakers standpoint, also Russell Westbrook is questionable. Which guards stand out the most if Russell Westbrook is out, especially considering that Austin Reeves is doubtful?
Yeah, so I mean, Schroeder should play a lot of minutes at 4,700. He's going to look okay at that price. You know, elevated price tag. LeBron coming back does cut into him a bit. Kendrick Nunn should be in the rotation if Westbrook is out. He's not going to be that exciting to get to on an 11 game slate anyway, I don't think, since LeBron's in. If Westbrook is in, though, I do think he looks good at 7,400, you know, playing without Davis. And he's just been very productive from a fantasy standpoint in his role off the bench. And now he's still going to get probably every minute that LeBron's not on the floor. So you're probably talking about around, you know, 40% of Westbrook's minutes if he's in being without Davis or LeBron out there.
Anything else that we should be talking about from the Lakers?
I don't think so.
And from the Kings side of the game, also injuries here. Domantas Sabonis is questionable. Harrison Barnes is questionable. So two obviously massive injuries for the Kings, but we haven't really seen them play much without Domantas Sabonis. So we don't really have a whole lot of data to go back on here to see like who would end up starting, especially because it's Sabonis and Barnes who are both questionable. But let's just assume that both of them are out for now. Who are the pieces that we should be considering from the Kings as being the best options?
Yeah, so I'm not sure who would start in place of Sabonis. We'd seen Metu backing him up recently. We saw Keta get some minutes last game. They have Rashawn Holmes still that, you know, they could just throw into the starting lineup. So I'm not sure where they would go if he is out. You do also have Alex Len not on the injury report anymore. So there's a lot of ways they can go at center. Whoever is starting, especially if it's Holmes or Len, if it's Holmes or Len, I would actually treat them not like a full-fledged starter where I'm giving them like 36 minutes, but I would expect them to be playing like upper 20s if they can avoid foul trouble. If it's Keta or Metu, I'd be a little bit more hesitant. They're also, you know, Metu in particular, not the same level fantasy producer. So a lot would depend on who gets the start in place of Sabonis. If Barnes is out, I expect you would get Terrence Davis moving into the starting lineup. I think they would treat it just like they did when Kevin Huerter was out. Davis would probably play 24 to 26 minutes. He's coming in at 4K on DraftKings, so there would be some appeal there. He's actually been over a fantasy point per minute guy this year, so he would look like a decent option. You'd also probably get more playing time from Kevin Huerter, Keegan Murray, and Malik Monk.
And then De'Aaron Fox also, I would have to assume he just soaks up a whole bunch of usage and would have the ball in his hands constantly in a scenario where there's no Domantas Sabonis. So Fox, $8,600 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, Fox is priced at $8,700. Wouldn't put him quite at the same level as, say, like a LeBron James or something like that, but De'Aaron Fox would be somewhere in the mix with SGA as my favorite pay-up guard option if Sabonis doesn't play. Is that reasonable to you?
Yeah, and I really like getting the Fox even if Sabonis does play. He disappointed last game, but still played 34 minutes. I think you're going to see him, you know, typically be around 34 minutes. He's been about a 1.2 fantasy point per minute guy overall this year, but 1.4 DraftKings points per minute without Sabonis on the floor. So he would look like a fantastic option if Sabonis is out. I think he's a good option if Sabonis is in. And also for Sabonis at 10-3, obviously that ownership's going to come up if he loses the Q tag. But this is another spot where it's going to be kind of tough to get there because he's center only and relatively expensive. But this is a good matchup for Domantas Sabonis. He's been fantastic this year, and he's playing huge minutes when he avoids foul trouble. Another game last time out against Charlotte where he played 41 minutes. You're just very, very consistently getting upper 30s, low 40s from him when he avoids foul trouble. So if he's in, he's one of the relatively low-owned centers that I think you can get to and just get a completely different roster build than the teams that are going to a 40% owned Thomas Bryant. On FanDuel, you have power forward eligibility, so he becomes a clear priority there.
All right, let's talk about the final game of the slate, the Charlotte Hornets against the Los Angeles Clippers. So if you guys haven't done it yet, do us a favor by liking the video and subscribing to the YouTube channel. Now, from the Charlotte Hornets, Terry Rozier, doubtful. Dennis Smith Jr. remains out. LaMelo Ball, another guy that I think we could be considering here. So LaMelo Ball, where does he fit into as far as priorities go amongst pay-up options?
Yeah, so a lot with him is going to come down to ownership. I think he's still a good option at 8,900, and right now he's only pulling 8% ownership. So I like getting there. His rebounding rate has been down a bit this year, which is a little bit concerning. Makes some sense given that Charlotte's playing Mason Plumlee more minutes than they did last year. Nick Richards is backing him up, so you pretty much have a center out there all the time. But you're getting huge minutes from LaMelo as well. He should play 34 to 36 minutes if he avoids foul trouble. That is a big if with him because the guy fouls a lot. But if he's going to be low owned, I like him in tournaments. If you get, that ownership coming up and then he ends up being more popular than De'Aaron Fox and a lot of these other guys, then I like pivoting away from him.
And then as for the other players from the Hornets, is there other players you should be considering potentially outside of LaMelo here? Oubre's got to be expensive. We've got Gordon Hayward in the mix. I think LaMelo is pretty clearly the top guy to consider. And despite the other injuries, it's kind of hard for me to find anybody else I really do like.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hayward and Oubre are worth a mention simply because of the minutes they're going to play. Oubre should be back in the starting lineup without Rozier. He should give you 37, 38 minutes. Hayward played like 36 and then 37 in a back-to-back. There's no reason to be concerned about his playing time. He's only 6,200. Only has about a 20% usage rate in games with LaMelo since the start of last year, but probably a little bit underpriced for his playing time. PJ Washington also at 5,400. Should give you around 30 minutes if he avoids foul trouble. Not a priority, but there are some low-owned pieces here that are relatively appealing.
All right. Now, the final team to talk about on the slate is the Clippers, and we simply do not have very much information here. Paul George is questionable. Norman Powell is questionable. Reggie Jackson is questionable. Ivica Zubac is questionable. So these are all guys who obviously play a massive role for the Clippers. It's a lot of moving pieces that kind of makes it difficult to parse. One thing I will add, practice yesterday. Paul George practiced. Reggie Jackson practiced. Zubac practiced. Norman Powell did not. So that does make me think Powell probably a little bit less likely to play than those other guys. But is there anything you'd like to mention here about the Clippers? Because it is a lot of guys that are questionable to definitively know who it is we want to play.
Yeah, I mean, if we assume that the questionable guys are in, there's not really much I like here at all. You do have a $7,900 Kawhi who's likely playing 32 minutes or so, but so he's getting some ownership. But outside of that, I wouldn't really have interest in much of anything. If George is out, clearly Kawhi looks better, and everybody starts to look better. We did also get Luke Kennard saying he's no longer on any sort of a minutes limit. At 4,200, if everybody's in, I really couldn't care less. That does come into play, though, if you do start to get these guys ruled out. Also, if Reggie Jackson's ruled out, I'm going back to John Wall. He played 28 minutes against the Wizards last game as a starter. Didn't play down the stretch, but if you're going to get 28 to 30 minutes from him, he's going to look like a pretty solid option at 6,200. If Jackson's in, then I'm not interested.
Yeah, it's going to be funny when Luke Kennard says he doesn't have a minutes restriction and everybody's in, so he plays like 20 minutes anyway because there just aren't minutes for him because other guys are better than him. But the Clippers, this is a situation that could potentially open up a whole lot of value. We're just going to need more information later in the day because once again, Paul George, Norman Powell, Reggie Jackson, Ivica Zubac's all questionable. It's a lot of pieces that could really move stuff around there. So check out Live Before Lock. Check out the Deeper Dive. Adam and I will be on those shows later on today. And once again, guys, if you haven't done it yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Good luck, and I'll see you later.